Sorry, let me just bring my video on. Right, I don't know if you can see me. Okay, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining this call. Today, we are hosting our last tool and technique session. Yes, our last tool and technique session for the year. It's certainly been a busy year for IBA South Africa, from hosting our very first face-to-face summit post-COVID, and also winning international awards. We've done a whole lot this year as a community, and you have been with us every step of the journey. So thank you, and thank you again. To the regional chairs, Lara from Durban, or the Durban chapter, or the Durban region, Lisego from the Joburg region, and Z from the Cape Town region, and all the volunteers in those respective regions. Thank you so much for uniting the business analysis community across the world. You've created this amazing platform for us to expand our connections and to grow our knowledge base through our many offerings, including this very tool and technique session, our last for the year. IBA South Africa has many other events that they offer and host, including our mentorship program, our masterclasses, our certification study groups, our micro classes, the BA Summit, our lean coffees, and Women's Day events. There are many, many platforms for you to join in. I hope and trust that you have been part of these amazing initiatives. If you haven't, where have you been? Where have you been? But if you have, awesome stuff, great to see you again. And I trust that we'll see you again next year. To the board, any board members that are on the call, to our IBA members, to the volunteers, and to the speakers, thank you so much for your service. Thank you for the contributions. Thank you for your sacrifices. They really don't go unnoticed. We really do appreciate the time that you've taken to invest in sharing and growing the IBA South Africa community. Just a closing remark on my side. I don't want to take away from Marcus, who will be sharing on process modeling, a topic I love so dearly. Just a closing remark or two. I think that we just need to highlight and remember as the BA community that there are untapped technologies, there are untapped solutions and unprecedented challenges that we may still face along the way. And that is why it's quite critical for you to invest in continuous learning and your growth. It is fundamental to your development. Your professional and your personal growth and integrity is at stake. Not only is it at stake, but it is also in your hands. So take full responsibility for that growth, and you'll be your own best advocate once you actually invest the time in your skill set. Business analysis, if you are a business analyst, if you're aspiring to be a business analyst, is really a no-regret skill. I love business analysis because of that. It's quite transferable. What we teach or what you learn from the BABOK or the BA community is transferable. You can use it in many other professions, and that's the beauty of it all. Then the other thing is, just don't forget that to continue to participate meaningfully in the IBA community, in any other arena of life that you're part of, build strong relationships. They will sustain you when life gets tough. Promote excellence, not perfection. Perfection does not exist. Be problem solvers in any sphere of space that you find yourself in. Be the thought leaders. Create content, meaningful content to be specific, and go to the people and serve them and help them in any way that they need. I'm going to stop because I can really talk a lot. I know myself. I'm going to hand over to Tim. Tim is going to be our host for the evening. Tim is also one of the volunteers from the Durban region. Thank you, Tim, as well for your sacrifices. I'll hand over to you to introduce our speaker and the house rules. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And if we do not see you at any of our final events, I think we'll have a final closing dinner or a year-end dinner at some of the regions. If we don't see you there, please keep safe during the festive season and enjoy the rest of the year.
Thank you so much, Ketelo, for that beautiful introduction. I'm sure you agree with me that despite the inflation and prices increase in practically everything, I'm sure that it's been an incredible year. Our micro class for today is brought to you by the IIBA Durban chapter, and we'll be considering the topic titled Process Modeling. And I'll quickly go through a little introduction about our presenter today. His name is Marcus Udogang. He is an IT consultant, writer, and presenter, specializing in project management and business analysis specifically business applications, requirement analysis, and business process management. He has worked in various industries, including financial services, oil and gas, and IT training and education sectors. Marcus also owns the Inquisitive Analyst podcast on YouTube channel, which focuses on the triumphs and challenges within the PM and BA fields. I'll quickly go through some house rules before Marcus take the floor. Please take note that the presentation will be 45 minutes long. You may post your questions in the main chat. We will read them to the presenter when it is time for question and answers. Presentations will be uploaded on the IIBA SA YouTube page, which is found on the link, as you can see. And please take note that unfortunately, we do not send out the presentation deck. If you would like to present a tool or technique to the community for next year, please contact us on durban@southafrica.iiba.org. To become a member of the IIBA South Africa chapter, go to the link. As you can see, there are a lot of freebies, there are a lot of things you can get when you become a full IIBA member. Because of time, Marcus, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Tim, for that introduction. Much appreciated. And let me share my screen so everyone can see it. Just a moment here. Okay, there we go. Hopefully you can see the introductory screen. I want to welcome everyone to today's session. As it was described, this is all about process modeling, a well-defined starting point for projects. So thank you, IIBA South Africa, for having me present this topic today. I want to ask a few questions to everyone here, and that is, why do we need process models? When do we actually need process models is really another question. How do we build process models is another question. And last but not least, what's in it for you anyway? We're going to look at three areas today. I want to look at what is business process management. I want to look at business process modeling and a process design approach. And these three areas are going to help us answer all these little questions I asked previously. Why do we need process models? When do we need them? And how do we build the models? And what's in it for you? But before I go through that, I have a question for everyone here. And I'm going to post it in the chat. And this is a Mentimeter question. Some of you may have used Mentimeter before. And what that encompasses, quite simply, is the screen in front of you here. What is process modeling? You can go to menti.com and you can type in the code that's on the screen, which is 41792207, or you can click the link that I've just given in the chat. And what you really want to do is be able to give me one word or one sentence on what you think process modeling is, and then you can press enter. You can enter 2 or 3 items if you want, or 2 or 3 times if you want, but enter one and press enter into the field what you think process modeling is, and then press the enter key. And it should pop up on the screen the results that we have. So with 42 people online, I'm sure I should be able to get a few answers. So let me give you an idea of what that would look like on the screen. Oh, there we go. So we've got answers coming along already. I'm going to show you what it should look like. Your screen should look something like this. Then you can just type in, enter your word, click the submit button, and we should be able to see some results. We've got a visual representation so far, a picture for process modeling. What else do you think process modeling is all about? Maybe it's about, oh, I don't know. Maybe it's about an ordering system. It could be about an ordering system. So I'm going to leave you to keep entering answers. We'll come back to this a bit. It's an illustration, certainly. It's a business process. Business modeling is business process. It's the journey. It is the journey. I like that. All right. If there's any other ideas that you think encompass process modeling, feel free to enter it. How workflow, or how workflows, correct? Well, I think that's a pretty good, those are pretty good answers. By all means, keep the answers coming. All right. Let's look at process modeling. But before we look at process modeling, we need to be able to look at business process management. And we also have to look at where a business analyst falls into business process management and process modeling. Now, if we look at BABEC chapter 1.2, it'll tell you what business analysis is all about. The business analyst, really, at the end of the day, is here to enable change in an enterprise or an organization. And we do that by defining our customer needs, by recommending solutions to the customer, that all these needs and solutions really help to deliver value to your stakeholders, right, or your customers. But business analysis really can be strategic or it can be operational. And it's all about that continuous improvement that we're here to provide. And business analysis really can also be used to understand a current state and help get us through change to a future state. And business analysis can also be performed from different perspectives. We've got Agile, we've got IT, we've got business process management. These are all different perspectives that business analysis works within. And that perspective is really our lens. It's our view to a certain current context. And that context is defined by the business. It could be a business initiative, for example, right? And if we look at BABEC 2.1, talks about being a business analyst. You know, there is a perspective of need. There's a perspective of solution design, right? The organization is really articulating their needs and the outcomes that the business analyst helps to document. So that's what you bring. That's what we all bring to the table as business analysts. We're there to tell or to help the organization. We're there to tell the organization why we are there and what we're here to contribute, right? Now let's look at business process management. It encompasses a lot of things. And one of those things is business process modeling. If you look at BABEC 7.1.4, I've put at the bottom of each screen, or sometimes at the top, I've put in orange what BABEC chapter I've taken some of this information from. So hopefully it helps you. You can go back and reference it later on. So in BABEC chapter 7.1.4, it's talking about building a process model. And it says that it's a visual way to convey information. And one of our answers on the screen was it's a visual representation, right? Because through this visual representation, it's gonna help us start a conversation, start a communication, start a shared understanding with our stakeholders. And it allows us to analyze, it allows us to refine our elicitation results into some type of requirement, some type of design. In a way, it's there to represent an activity flow or a flow of business processes, right? It's a sequence of actions, it's a sequence of events that's represented through this process model. And one of the answers on the screen was workflows, right? So it gives us that workflow. And in BABEC 4.4, it talks about we're here for a shared understanding, and communication is all part of that decision process and of that business process management. It's all about shared understanding. When it comes to requirements, I mean, what's the corporate strategy? What's the corporate mandate that gives us that context? And in the context of the organization's strategy, how will we solve this problem? Well, we could go to their annual reports to understand how the corporation's strategy works. That gives us some idea of it. And we need to be able to understand what the need of the organization is and what kind of value we can bring them within that context, right? So there's 4 things that you really need to know. BABEC 6.1.2 talks about that. We need to understand technology, policy, stakeholders, process. It's those 4 things that will enable us to build these diagrams and commit to implementing change from a current state to a future state. So why is this change needed? Why do we need to be able to define the current state and the future state? Well, it's one way to help implement change, and it's one way to create business. It's one way to help the business solve their problems. And what does the stakeholder want that I can give them? So when you're talking to stakeholders, you can say, this is what I know. This is why they're saying this. These other stakeholders are saying this. So what's your take on it? Help me understand the context. And I'm going to create this process map to give even better context to what it is that you do. If I don't understand the business process or the data model, then I can't build a process diagram. I mean, that's simple. So, and you have to understand also what are the benefits, what are the implications of this diagram to the business, right? How do we improve business in the context of the software applications that we use, of the IT systems that we use, that the organization uses? I mean, what's the technology and what are the business implications? As well, if we're not changing processes, if we're not improving performance, then it's a bit of a waste of time, really. So we have to make plans for change. We have to know how to deliver change. And we need to understand what the problem or what that opportunity is that we're trying to solve and why. I mean, what's the impact? What's the benefit of making this change? Or you could also see it another way. What's the cost of not implementing the change? Do we implement it now, or do we implement it a few weeks from now or a few months from now? So now we know what business process management is. It's a way to model, it's a way to analyze a business process, right? Let's take a quick look at process modeling. And if you look at BABEC chapter 10.35, we know that a business process model describes that sequential flow of work or activity in an organization. And BABEC 10.35.1 says that process modeling is a standardized graphical model used to show how work is carried out. And it really is the foundation for process analysis. It's work across a certain number of defined tasks. And a process model can help us to document these operational procedures, if you will. Chapter 10.35.2 says that it shows us how work aligns to different stakeholders. That's one thing that process modeling does. It also allows us to understand relationships between processes. It's describing what occurs or what will occur during a process. It describes the context of a solution or part of a solution. And the BABEC also talks about process analysis as, it says that process analysis assesses a process for its efficiency, for its effectiveness. It's identifying those opportunities for change, right? So we have to really ensure that the solution addresses those right issues and it's helping to minimize waste. This is the main purpose of process modeling. Now, I've got another question for you folks out there. And let's see if I can bring it on the screen. Let's see if I can go to the next screen. And I'd like to ask all of you, do you create business process diagrams? You can answer yes or no. I'd like to get an idea of whether you create business process diagrams or not. So let's wait a few seconds for the answers coming in. All of you run or draw or create business process diagrams. All right, so for now, we'll settle with most of you doing that. It looks like even in the chat, some people are saying yes, yes, yes. So it looks like not everyone, or sorry, there's no one here who doesn't do it, I guess. All right. I also want to bring note There was a comment that a process model allows visualization of business processes so organizations can better understand their internal business procedures so that they can be managed and made more efficient. Thanks to Tokozo. I hope I pronounced that name properly. Thank you. Yes, everyone here seems to create business process models of some sort. So that's good to know. All right. Now let's look at, if I can get my additional screen going here. Just a moment, bear with me. Let's take a look at business process modeling now. Now, in business process modeling, I have a good diagram here of an example, which I'll go into a few examples later on, but this is just sort of a preliminary. Business process modeling, I mean, what does it take to create the perfect business process? Now, realistically, it's not easy to create perfection, we know that, but one really can strive for excellence. So let's talk about striving for an excellent business process, right? And a business process is, we know, it's a sequence of activities that's going to result in some output. So first and foremost, before we begin to model this process, we need to gain this understanding of what activities it is the business does and why they do them. And it's important to spend a bit of time trying to learn what those standards and what those business rules are that help drive processes. And I'm going to talk a bit later about business rules and give you a definition of them. But for now, let's just understand that we need to know the standards and we need to know the business rules that help drive those processes that we're going to put in the diagram. And while we're at it, we should also be asking a few questions, like, are there gaps in your current standards? What are the gaps between what the business says that they do today and what they actually do today? And perhaps even what they should be doing as per industry best practices. What is their vision of the future in the short term and the long term? Now, our business process model should be able to create this shared understanding. It's going to show how these processes flow, and it can help us detect and fix certain problems. It's going to help us refine, it's going to help us streamline those process flows. Remember, it's all about getting rid of waste. And we need to discover the organization's pain points. We need to be able to explore the challenges that they have. We need to be able to examine the benefits of helping to re-engineer their business processes to help address those pains, to help address those gaps. But also we must try to demonstrate to the business that we understand what it is that they are doing today and where they would like to be in the future. Then we can start beginning to model the current and the future processes. Now, what are the characteristics of an excellent business process? Well, a process is comprised of a series of events, of a series of functions, and they're performed by certain roles within this organization. We've got inputs, maybe consumer inputs. We've got product outputs. We've got logical operators. We've got those operators to help control the flow of activity that's being supported by certain systems. So it's all these things are connected. You know, we've got processes, we've got functions, we've got roles, units, data, you know, events going on. And it's all this connectivity between all these things that's critical to achieving our excellent business process. Creating this excellent process doesn't really just end there. There are really technical characteristics of an excellent business process. And in our experience, we know that the creation of an excellent process has many different facets to it. And especially when it comes to presentation. We need to be able to make sure that our presentation is understandable to those who are reading it. So what else is important in creating an excellent business process? Up here on the screen, I have an as-is diagram. This will be your current model, and I'll go to explain it a bit later. But we need certain symbols to use on a basic process model. We need a start and end point. You can see that from the green points on the screen within that diagram. We need a process step. We need a database. Maybe there's a document that we need to represent, or a page connector, or a decision. So to draw these process maps, we could use a software like Visio or Lucidchart. And Visio, the good thing about Visio is that it sort of helps us to manually manage these structures, same with Lucidchart. But there's a few other things that we need to keep in mind. We need clarity and readability, right? So the actual model of this process is critical to its clarity and its readability, right? And the content is obviously important too. But if the process is not well laid out, it can be very difficult for your users to interpret it. So presentation really is everything. You got to start with that start point and the end point, as we know. And you need clearly defined inputs and clearly defined outcomes. You notice too the space separation between each of these processes, or between each of these blocks. I've also given them different colors, right? So there's an effective use of white space that can help enhance that readability. And if you don't have any constraints on your screen, you can zoom in and zoom out, then you should be able to make use of that white space really well. The layout is also very important. Whether we lay out a process horizontally or if we're laying it out vertically in a swim lane like you see in front of you, then we're going to have to pay really close attention to the logical sequence of these events. I mean, how the eye flows. We flow up and down, and we flow left to right, at least in the Western world, we do. And unless we're incorporating a loop structure in that process, we're going to try to avoid going in the opposite direction, like from right to left. We should always be going left to right, right? And it's all about readability. It's all about clarity, right? This is paramount to modeling that business process. And the lines, you notice the lines that connect each of these boxes. The lines that join the events or join the functions, they're not supposed to cross over. Okay, that's going to make it difficult to read as well. There are some cases where you can, but for now, just make sure that the lines don't touch. And what about the size? You know, we're not going to try to be constrained by that physical size of the printed copy. If you want to print this out on a sheet, you can use a plotter. A plotter can print out a really large version of it. So you're going to try to compartmentalize your process on separate models, for instance. If you want to drill down, you might have a box, you click on it, and it takes you to open up another file, right? And you click on that, it opens up another file, so on and so forth. So you can have processes and sub-processes within your big diagram. Let me show you a slide here. Try and give you an example up close. So we've got here, we actually have, this is an access card creation as is diagram. It involves 3 departments, HR on the top, involves IT, and it involves security. And it seems that each of these departments have a similar process, but they don't cross over. And you'll also notice that there's a number 1 in some of these places. So it means that when you've finished one process, instead of drawing a line all over the map to go to the end, I've just indicated a 1 here. So whatever process comes out of here goes into the end process. And it's an easy way to create that extra white space on your diagram. Here's the 2B version of that same diagram after you've eliminated certain processes that you don't need. Maybe they're a waste, and you've amalgamated different things. This is the implementation of a middleware software, and this middleware process is all in purple. So I've used different colors to indicate different parts of the swim lane, so you understand there are different departments or there are different systems taking place. This is another example where I've got a swim lane on horizontally, but also vertically I've divided them into sections. So one is a pre-event, and one is during a specific event, and one is after an event or post-event. And you'll notice that all these lines don't cross over, they're all going from left to right. And I've made sure that the lines here curve. There's a setting in Visio that enables you to make this a rounded curve as opposed to a square one. That's always good because it shows the flow. And you can also put notes if you want on your diagrams. This is a much larger diagram, process flow. And I've also got a more complicated diagram. You'll notice that this one actually has a legend at the top, upper right. I'd highly recommend you use a legend, especially with a complex diagram. You could even put a version at the bottom, version legend, to indicate this is version 1, version 2, and so on and so forth. Kind of like you would in a specification document. All right. So I hope that was a good explanation of a current process, how we moved to a future state, and the different variety of process diagrams that you can create and how you should be able to color them out. Each swim lane should represent maybe a department, and each of these should also start with a verb, like create purchase order. So when you look at some of these diagrams, you'll see that I usually put the verb at the top, assign, then apps to user groups, validate a user's department. I usually always like to put the verb on a separate line. Check off the user profile, find profiles, update profile changes. I'm always putting that verb to start on a separate line. That's very important to know. All right, so we know that these processes are really providing information that's interconnected, right? Between different departments, between different people. And it's obviously a shared document that we've created by asking questions to our stakeholders. And we want all our stakeholders to be able to understand this one diagram. So we have a lot of white space, and each of those processes or shapes that you use are all the same size or similar size. You don't have a really big one and a really small one. And all of this diagram has to have context so it's understandable to the end users. We also have to know that we can reuse this information, these diagrams, because it's going to help us save time for when we need them in the future, right? And it's going to also save cost for the company because we don't have to redo them. We don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So we understand the context in which the stakeholders work. They execute strategy, we know that, and we need to understand from that strategy down how our processes relate to the delivery of our services and our customers. So process mapping really helps us to define more detailed requirements. And it helps us to make sure that we're managing those processes properly, right? I mentioned version control of these documents. Make sure you do that as well. Version 1.1, version 1.2, and so on. We also have to know who we're going to hand off these process maps to, right? And I was going to use the whiteboard for a moment, but before I do that, let me show you. I may not need to do that. Let me show you one particular diagram, which is quite nice. Get that over here to the screen. Hopefully you can see that. This is a company called Elements.Cloud, and Ian Gotts runs Elements.Cloud. He's been a guest speaker at the IIBA Ottawa Outaouais chapter, which is the chapter I'm part of. And he described, this is an online cloud process modeling app. Not only does it look like what you see in front of you, but every time someone makes a change, you can watch them make that change it's kind of like being on any online cloud app where multiple people are working at the same time. So this is another version of process modeling. And every time you have a use case, or every time you have a change you want to make, you can certainly associate it with a specific process. So when you click on that process, you can see all the changes that were made. So that's a really cool modern version of process modeling. Now, we understand this process map. How are we going to get to the process map? We know we have to understand the strategy of a company. We know we have to understand what the users are doing and how to represent that. But how do we gather that information from the stakeholders? That's important. So that's what we're going to look at now. There are different process modeling types, right? There are many techniques, many methodologies in process analysis. And I think the scope and the purpose of the project is going to help you determine which of those techniques, which of those methodologies you're going to use. I mean, how much rigor you're going to put into this. So I've got on the screen one called SIPOC or SIPOC. And in BABAC 10.34.1, you can take a look at it in more detail. And what SIPOC really is, it's a process analysis method, or it's a tool that cleanly shows the flow between a problem, its opportunities, and its gaps and its root cause. And it allows you to understand the suppliers, the inputs, the process, the outputs, the customers that are in that process. And you can easily outline them. And it can go down to these specific steps at the bottom, step 1, step 2, step 3. Oh, we create a profile. We select items to purchase. We're confirming the payment information. We're confirming the delivery information, reviewing the receipt. Really nice, easy way to represent what you're going to put into your process model diagram. There are other methods too, like value stream mapping, right? And that's sort of a picture of all the end-to-end processes and what value is or not added to the diagram. You could do that as well. I'll leave that up to you to take a look at. The cool thing about value stream mapping, it's really gauging the wait times, the wait and the processing times between each of these boxes that you have on your process diagram. So I think that's kind of cool because it can kind of show you exactly where you're minimizing waste or where you're maximizing waste. Then we've also got business process model and notation, known as BPMN. And that's more for technical audiences. And it's used across the business, across the information technology domains. It's sort of an industry standard out there. And then there's UPN, which is what we use in Visio, right? It's all about business improvement, end user training. We use that for that. And it's really aimed at the business user. So that's why I'm focusing today's presentation on that UPN side of things, the Visio or the Lucid chart. All right, so let's look at process design approaches. Now, how long does it take to do a process? You're going to ask your stakeholders, you're going to give me an idea of your approach. Give me an idea of your philosophy as well as the steps that you follow. You also have to know who the sponsor is of your project, right? Because if there's no sponsor, you're not going to have a project. But there's 3 big things to know and understand here. Standards drive processes and requirements. Process drives more requirements. And the best industry practice really also drives those processes and those standards. We also have to seek first to understand what the business does today and why do they do what they do today, right? So we need to be able to learn how their system works. We're going to review current documents on those relevant standards, on those relevant processes. We're going to look at separate business units. We're going to learn how to use their current systems to point out how we understand stuff. We're going to reference the standards that we believe influence that process design. So, why do they do what they do today? Why don't they do something else? You can ask that question. What are the pain points? What's the root cause? What are the standards that they're following? What are the gaps in those standards? I mean, these are questions you should be asking your stakeholders. You're going to meet with business units prior to any workshop. And That way they get a better understanding of what they're going to do when they get to the workshop. And those workshops are going to help you expand on all those processes. So that's one way to be able to get an understanding of what it is people do. You could hold workshops. And you also want to be able to have interview questions for them. Howard Podeswa has a really good book out called The Business Analyst's Handbook. And in that book, I have a screenshot from it up here. So if you pick up that book on page 69 of chapter 2, that's where the screenshot comes from. It's all about who do you invite to these meetings, to these interviews. Well, you can invite customers, you've got process owners, you've got users, product managers, architects. This book tells you who to invite to a business process modeling meeting. It also provides you questions that you can ask. I've provided you some already, but Howard mentions what is the current as-is workflow, you could ask. I mean, what are the problems or bottlenecks or inefficiencies within this workflow? Are all the participants in that end-to-end process, are they all accounted for, or are they more stakeholders that I'm unaware of? What is the role of each of those participants in this model? You know, so you've got to be able to take the answers from these questions you're asking, and that you can either put into that SIPOC diagram, or you could put it into a mind map. And I have an example of a mind map here, something I did at work not too long ago. This mind map really is an easy way to take notes. If you're not going to scribble it down on a piece of paper, you can use your laptop to draw the mind map as you're asking questions to people. Adrian Reed out of IIBA UK does that a lot. He goes to conferences, he'll write up a mind map and post it on his website or on LinkedIn for everyone to see. I think that's a great way to map out a process before you put it into an actual diagram. Now, this mind map is going to help capture those ideas, obviously. It's not a sort of a non-linear diagram, right? But it's using images. You can throw in images. You've got words. You've got different colors. And it's all about connected relationships within, you know, that organization, right? So it gives you a form of structure. It gives you a form of logic to your ideas that you're going to help map out. But the cool thing about a mind map is that it provides this central idea. And that central idea, like in this case, right in the dead center, it's information technology. We've got subtopics. And that's followed by layers of ideas or sublayers of ideas, subtopics, right? And that's going to help you capture that full concept. You know, context is going to be captured. So these mind maps really help you think through those complex concepts or problems. It helps you explore relationships between various areas of a problem, and it helps to inspire creative thinking, because that's what we're here to do as BAs, right? We're here to think creatively. Someone asks, Patience asks, where do you get mind maps? Well, one mind map is XMind. That's the one I use, and I pay for it. Some of these are free, or the functionality is limited if it's free. But take a look at XMind. Instead of throwing you a whole bunch of them, just use one. Now, we also need to seek to understand. We've asked a few questions to our stakeholders to understand deeper about their business processes, but we have to be able to seek to understand what the organization is not doing, but they should be doing as per those industry best practices, right? It's just as important to stand back and look at the as-is process that's done today and ask, why are they not doing today what they should be doing tomorrow? Something like that, right? So you're going to ask, why are you not doing this? So to have an idea of that answer, you have to be able to see the big picture of the organization. What's their strategy and how does it fit into this modeling map? Are we doing this because we're driven by external processes? Are we doing this to be able to cut corners? Is that why we do things the way we do today? Are there current limitations to our applications, to our training that force us to do things this way today. Maybe there's something missing from our documentation that's why we do things this way. So you've got to use project and content expertise to help design a better process. Where there are unanswered questions or there are no answers to your questions, you've got to put that as a discussion point. How are they going to improve the process to address those pain points, to address those gaps? That's another thing you have to think about. You're going to look for risks in the process that are going to possibly help impede a solution that you're looking for. And all these things you're asking, it's all about bringing added value to the table for your client or for the organization you work for. I'd highly recommend you take that time to understand what the organization is doing. Take the time to develop that high-level as-is process diagram like I showed you earlier, and start to review the business. Be able to reference those standards that help influence that process design. And you want to be able to include the requirements in the process that they have today. Write out those pain points, write out those gaps for reference so you can talk to your manager about it and your stakeholders. And if time permits, you're going to try to update all of this as you learn new pain points and gaps along the way. It's all about optimizing the performance of that process, right? Because your process execution, it's not static, it's constantly changing. And you're constantly measuring, you're constantly assessing for better opportunities. Now, Tisetso asks, in Agile methodology, at what stage would you document a business process? Is it before the acceptance criteria or after? In an Agile environment, like the elements.cloud webpage that I showed you, you're constantly updating this business process with documentation, constantly doing it. When you're updating a use case, it's seen right then and there at that moment. We call this, if you want, miniaturized documentation. And the IIBA Ottawa Oodaway chapter had Ian Gott's talk on this topic. So if you go to IIBA Ottawa in YouTube, you find our YouTube channel and you'll find the video that Ian Gotts did. If it's not on there, it might be invisible. Ask me and I can send you the link to it. It's an excellent 1-hour discussion on miniaturized documentation and like something that's used in the Agile world. But definitely you're not building these big business review documents like in the waterfall. You're just doing it in bits and pieces and you're updating it to that elements.cloud cloud app, and everyone can see it as you update it. I think that's a really good way in an Agile environment to do documentation. So, and it's at different stages, not just before or after acceptance criteria. All right. We also have to look at training, workshops, testing our model. So you're going to be prepared to test this proposed to-be process against those gaps, against those pain points that you've collected. And you can do that in a workshop. You can prepare a workshop. When you do so, are all the materials available and complete? So for example, you have your plotter paper, your flip charts, your pens, your black pens, your blue pens, different colored pens, and so on and so forth. So when you go to the workshop, make sure you've got the materials you need. If you're going to train people, how much training is required? There's different ideas and different concepts that you're going to present in that training. So be prepared to do the training on that specific process that you're working on, if that's needed. And you're obviously going to document thoroughly all these comments that come out in the parking lot items, the decisions, the risks that arise in that workshop, and so on and so forth. This is very time consuming, but it's critical to ensure that your customer questions are not forgotten and that you've got these constant follow-ups to be done. And it was just mentioned here by Timothy to kindly post your questions in the chat box, and we'll take all the questions immediately after the presentation. Thanks, Tim. So I want to really say you're here as a business analyst to demonstrate that the value that you bring is that of best practice by doing what we've talked about and using that content knowledge and using that expertise. I want to briefly explain, like I said I would, about a business rule. Babok doesn't go too deep about business rules. It's kind of a high level. And on page 64, that's chapter 4.2.6, it says that business rules really are where identify the rules that govern decisions in an organization. That's kind of a business rule. They define, they constrain, they enable the organizational operations. And then if you go to page 240, 241 in Babok, that's 10.9, it says that business rules, it's rules that help shape and guide the business behavior and the decision making. Obviously, you need to capture business rules from the stakeholders. You have to be able to express them clearly in your diagram. You need to validate them. You need to refine them. You need to have them align with business goals. But I think a better definition of business analysis is from Ronald Ross. And he says a business rule really contains four things. It contains a fact, a definition, a constraint, and a derivation. So a fact is, are we creating a quote in our diagram? Are some artifacts being created alongside, say, a client order? So that's a fact. What is a client order? That's the definition. And a constraint really is 80% of business rules are a constraint. It's something that we have to resolve or solve a problem. It's something we have to get through to understand those constraints and the problems in that client order. And then we have a derivation. If you need to calculate something like a total or an average, you need to understand the formulas that are going to solve for that number. That's a derivation. So 4 things in a business rule: a fact, a definition, a constraint, and a derivation. A very simple business rule is provide a tax receipt for a donation that's over $25. Or on page 242 of Babok, it's got a longer business rule example, which is an order must not be placed when the billing address that's provided by the customer doesn't match the address that they have on file, if it's a credit card provider. So that's a longer business rule, but those are 2 examples of business rules. All right, with that said, I have one more last question for you all. Oh, we have a question from Ntokozo. How do I create exciting BPM visions that could lead to entire new process visions of my organization? Well, you take the steps that we just talked about. You have to talk to the stakeholders, see what they're doing today, and how you can implement change to minimize waste. That's the value that you add as a BPM developer or BPM diagram artist, I guess. All right, one last question that I have for you folks here. And that is, how do you feel about process modeling? Do you feel very interested, or you're still thinking about it? You're really unsure. So you can type in, oh, look, everyone's very interested. All right, Menti.com 4179-2207, or the link that I just posted in the chat. How can we measure things that are impossible to measure? Well, that's all about the other diagram I talked about, where you can put the times for each of those processes. That's one way to measure maybe that client order. How long does it take to do a client order? And where can I reduce that? So I know it takes 30 minutes when it should take only 20 minutes, right? So you could put timings between your processes to measure that as well. Very interested. All right, I thought so. Everyone is very interested. Okay, now I had a quick thing. I'm pretty much near closing here. I did have just a quick thing I wanted to mention about capabilities and processes. So the capability really is how we do something, and the process is what we are actually doing. So purchase order creation is your capability, right? It's not just a process, it's a procedure, and it gives all the steps or the paths to create that purchase order. So we have to know who the people are involved in this procedure. Is it a functional team? Is it a buyer, a seller, and so on? And we also, for the business process, it tells us how we're going to create a client order. We need that verb in there, right? We're going to create client order. That's a process within that capability of purchase order creation. And we've got data. I mean, what data do I need to create a client order? We've got systems or interfaces, applications. Do we understand which system and interface will help me create that client order? Where am I going to send the data to in that client order? And we've got technology. I mean, that's the underlying technology of the system of that organization. I mean, I'm using an SAP database, an Oracle database. There's a certain kind of network that's being used. You've got to be able to know that and maybe even document it in your diagram as well. So all these things are part of that client order creation capability that's going to go into your process diagram. Well, quick summary. So we've answered those questions. Why do we need process models? When do we need them? And how do we build them? Process modeling is certainly a well-defined starting point for your project. And it's a way to be able to understand what the problem is, what we're trying to solve, and why, and what impact or benefit it has on the company. What's in it for you anyway, right? So without taking up more time, just a quick summary. I work for IVAS Consulting, and we do business analysis and project management consulting. And I help run the Inquisitive Analyst YouTube and podcast show, as was mentioned by Tim earlier. I chat with project managers and business analysts on the show about their challenges and triumphs. I have 2 new videos coming up. One is interviewing the content creator at Menti.com, at Mentimeter. So that video should be up in the next few days, hopefully. And it's a really good way to be able to interact with your audiences to use Mentimeter. So thank you, everyone, for listening to me as long as I was chatting. And thank you, IIBA South Africa, for having me today. Wishing you all a wonderful and fabulous day. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. All right, so we've got a lot of comments. Thanks, Marcus. Great presentation. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. No one has any other questions? You gotta have some questions. You gotta have some questions.
Thank you so much, Marcus, for that insightful presentation. And I think we can open the floor for any comments or questions from people in the room. I think it was pretty straightforward, and people are saying awesome presentation. Thanks, Marcus. Thank you. Explained very well. It's all full of compliments. I think it's a job well done to you, Marcus.
All right. Well, thank you. I hope I've explained it as best as I can. There's always a better way to explain it, but considering my time frame, I tried to squeeze a lot in there. So thank you. Thank you for having me. If you want to talk business process, by all means, I've got my email there on the screen, or I did earlier. The PowerPoint presentation is also in PDF. I think that will be sent to you, and my contact information is at the bottom. Feel free to send me an email anytime or look me up on LinkedIn.
Okay, I think that is a question. Is it a no-no to add icons and emojis in a process model?
Sorry, what was that again?
The question is it a no-no to add icons, emojis in a process model?
You know where you could put the icons? I wouldn't put them on, but you could put them in your legend, maybe at the bottom, or if you've got the version control chart at the bottom, you could probably stick that in, just kind of as a funny thing. But I wouldn't drop them into. You could do, if you have a process model, it's not really a process model, kind of like your mind map. You could stick them in. You could stick in pictures and icons for companies, but I wouldn't put it in the process model. It really depends on the company you're working for and how professional that document is. Some people don't mind it, but most probably will frown on it. So don't just do it. If it's a startup company and they don't mind, great. If it's a big corporation, I wouldn't do it.
Another question here. You mentioned a video clip on how to miniaturize documentation. Would you mind sharing, please?
Yeah, let me try and find that link. I have a very funny suspicion it was a hidden link. Let me hang on just a sec. Let me try and look for it. I have a funny suspicion that it's yeah, I went to look for it, it's hidden. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find that link and I'm going to send it to Tim or Lara, and they can send it out to everyone. It's a really, really good presentation by Ian Gotts at IIBA Ottawa. Yeah, I'll send it to you folks. You can send it out.
Okay, all right, thank you. I think I have another one. How do you make the legends on Visio?
Yeah, so the legends really, all it is just being able to take one of the shapes, like maybe a rectangle, and being able to do smaller rectangles with text in it. There's no real legend shape. You kind of have to build your own from scratch, but there's a text functionality. You just drag and drop the rectangle, for instance, and you can start typing. So that's one way to do it. And by the way, you can also throw an icon, maybe your company icon in there as well, in the legend, if you want to.
Okay, another one. The debate around process modeling versus workflow. I think the person wants to know probably the differences.
Oh, your process models, yeah, your process models don't really change that much. Your workflow will change, more frequently. I think that's the big difference. So, I mean, you're going to change that process model, but less frequently than the workflow.
Okay, I think this is the last one. Why is the system development lifecycle considered an iterative process?
Why is the systems development lifecycle? I think every process has a certain degree of iteration to it. Just in Agile, there's more iteration than you would see in Waterfall. So if it's a software development lifecycle, if it's a systems development lifecycle, you're always going back to, you're going to one step, you're testing, that's iteration. You're going to the next step, you're testing, that's iteration. You're going to the next step, you're testing, that's iteration. It's just that it's more well-defined in Agile, and it's more expected in Agile, and it's more frequent in Agile.
I guess that's all the questions we have for you today, Marcus. I'm sure by the time we call upon you next time, you will be willing to come again and have the presentation.
All right. I see two quick questions. How important is it to automate the process? It is very important to automate smaller processes. Larger processes might take longer or might not be needed. Do you know any tool used to automate the process? Not offhand, no. It won't be, okay, good example of this. That as is diagram I showed you in the 2B diagram, the 2B diagram was an automated process. I drew the diagram up, and that automated process was in middleware. We had a developer build it. I didn't build it, but I did document it. So, and he was using a software called, it was a combination of two softwares. Okta is a middleware, and there's all sorts of APIs, REST APIs you can use. So he was using those REST APIs and connecting them to a Genetec, which is our security system API. So that was automated by a developer, but documented by me on a process diagram. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I guess so. Thank you so much, Marcus, and thanks to everyone for joining us today for our Thursday Tools and Techniques. I guess we'll see you next year. Do have a lovely evening.
Great, thank you. See you all. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Marcus.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.